here. Good morning. It is Monday, April the 5th, and this is The Drill. And now for the daily declaration of spiritual warfare. Your victories over Satan will release peace. My child, I will give you rest from all your enemies. I will give peace and quietness to all my children. When your ways please me, I will make even your enemies to be at peace with you. I will give strength to you, and I will bless you with peace. Your salvation will come from me, and I will be your strength in the time of trouble. I will help you and deliver you and save you because you trust in me. Do not forget my law, and let your heart keep my commands. For length of days, long life, and peace will be added to you. Trust in me, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge me, and I will direct your paths. Prayer declaration. Father, I trust in you with all my heart, and I acknowledge you in all my ways. I will not depart from you or become wise in my own eyes. I will fear your name and depart from evil, for in so doing I will find health for my flesh and strength for my bones. Your kindness will not depart from me, nor will your covenant of peace be removed from my life. Great will be the peace of my children and grandchildren. Amen. That was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare. And now, everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. Please be seated. And now I'm going to be reading from the not the Declaration of Spiritual Warfare. We've already done that. I am going to be reading from The Last Superstition. And it's a book about let's see here. From religion and counter-religion. And it is about actually the people that consider themselves naturalists, materialists, and one of them has changed his mind and decided that there is proof for the existence of God. I have said that secularism is itself a kind of religion. Admittedly, this might seem odd, considering that secularists think of themselves, of course, as rejecting all religion. So is there anything more to the charge that mere rhetorical turnabout, the flinging of an insult back at the person who first made it? There is, not least because I am very far from regarding religion and religious per se as insulting descriptions. Indeed, for reasons that will be clear by the end of this book, and they are reasons, not the ludicrous straw man conception of faith at which the new atheists, like all village atheists, like to take pot shots. I would say that a truly religious man is, all things being equal, and of course they are often very far from equal, for that reason and to that extent a sane and virtuous man. While a man who is irreligious, and especially a man who is positively hostile to religion, is, for that very reason and to that extent, a bad man and an irrational man. In short, a religious sensibility, properly understood, is a moral and intellectual virtue, and indifference or hostility to religion is a moral and intellectual vice. So when I say that secularism is a religion and imply that this is a bad thing, I am speaking very loosely, speaking with the vulgar, as it were. In particular, speaking with secularists themselves, insofar as I have claimed that secularists are religious in their own eccentric sense of the word as connotating dogmatism, ignorance, and intolerance. And a little aside here, what he should have said, what he should describe them as cultists. They're not religious. Religion, he's using that as a metaphor. and the better way to describe it, to be more accurate, is cultist. Back to the book. But there is more to it than this. Many secularists like to assimilate religion to superstition, when in fact superstition is not religion per se, but at most the corruption of true religion. Just as tyranny is not government per se, but merely the corruption of government. Just as wage labor is comparable to slavery only very remotely and only under the very worst circumstances, and just as prostitution is not in any interesting sense even remotely comparable to marriage, despite some extremely superficial analogies. Of course, there are people who deny that such obvious differences are real. Marxists, anarchists, radical feminists, and other denizens of the intellectual slums who mistake an inability to make the simplest conceptual distinctions for deep insight. To these, it seems, we can add the ranks of the secularist, quote, thinkers, unquote, when new atheists and their ilk assure us in all their seriousness that believing in God is just like believing in the Easter Bunny, or that teaching religion is tantamount to child abuse. They remind me of the freshman philosophy student who once proudly declared to me his discovery that getting a girl out on a date was really no different from hiring a call girl, since what it's all about is giving something in exchange for sex. In both cases, the analysis put forward is evidence not of profound philosophical understanding, but merely of being a shallow and sophomoric jackass. Yet many secularists believe, or at least give every appearance of believing, things that are even more crassly stupid than this, things that merit them the label superstitious, if anyone merits it. As the late David Stove has argued at length, Dawkins' famous claim that we are all, quote, manipulated, unquote, by our, quote, selfish genes, unquote, can only both be true and interesting if interpreted absurdly as a literal attribution of superhuman intelligence and cunning to what are quite obviously mindless tiny bits of biological matter. That is, an abstraction of godlike powers to genes. We shall see later why Dawkins and other naturalistic thinkers are, whether they intended this or not, necessarily pushed into such absurdities by the logic of their attempt to combine materialism with the biological fact that genes are carriers of information. Dawkins also claims, as does his acolyte Dennett, that our minds are nothing more than congeries of memes, ideas, practices, and other cultural phenomena that compete with one another the way genes do, and that the process of cultural evolution generated by this competition is what really determines our thoughts and behaviors. It is a natural selection itself that is now treated as a pseudo-deity guiding all our fates, with Dennett in particular constantly and shamelessly making reference to the good design, etc., that evolution manifests. Even though evolution, as a purportedly blind and purposeless natural process, couldn't in any true and interesting sense manifest design or guidance without having a godlike intelligence and will. And then there is, of course, the quasi-divine status Marxists afforded the laws of history and the quasi-ecclesiastical authority they invested in the Communist Party, Comte's religion of humanity, and so forth. G.K. Chesterton probably never actually said that, quote, he who does not believe in God will believe in anything, unquote, but he surely would have said it had he been acquainted with the lunacies one finds peddled by contemporary secularists. At the most extreme end of the spectrum, we find eliminative materialist philosophers who deny the very existence of the human mind. A minority view, to be sure, but one that is, as we will see, the logical outcome of the naturalistic trend of modern philosophical thinking. We've already mentioned Singer's obscene defense of infanticide, necrophilia, and bestiality. Or to take what is now, alas, a far less exotic example, there's a current push for same-sex marriage, a metaphysical absurdity on all fours with round squares that even the ancient pagans would have regarded as a contemptible mark of extreme societal decadence. And then there are the various moralistic causes, environmentalism, animal rights, vegetarianism, veganism, and the like, not all inherently mad and not endorsed by all secularists, but often given a ridiculously exaggerated importance and fanatically pursued by them, each associated with its own obsessive-compulsive quasi-sacramental rituals. Though he would scarcely have thought it possible, Chesterton would find that New Secularist Man, circa 2008, is even more absurd creature than the incarnation with which he had to deal. A copy of Skeptic magazine ostentatiously tucked under his arm, the Darwin fish on the bumper of his car proudly signals his group identification with other members of the herd of independent thinkers, quote unquote. He knows that there is no God, and he isn't sure whether even the thoughts he thinks he's having are real or not. But he is pretty sure that his selfish genes and his memes in some way manipulate his every action, and quite certain that there's nothing questionable per se about marrying another man, strangling an unwanted disabled infant, or sodomizing a goat or a corpse. Despite his hatred of religion, he thinks global warming is a greater danger than Islamic terrorism, and whether meat is murder is a preposition he thinks eminently worthy of consideration. Evidently, they don't make skeptics like they used to. A second reason for characterizing secularism as a religious phenomenon, then, is that in some respects it resembles, if not religion per se, at least a corrupted form of religion. Superstition, with all the irrationality and credulity that goes along with it. But both of the religious characteristics of secularism that I've described so far, its bigotry and its superstition, stem from a third and deeper respect in which secularism can only be properly understood in religious terms, namely that the content of secularism as a philosophy and a sensibility is entirely parasitic on religion. It is not just that secularists happen to reject and oppose religion, it is that there is nothing more to their creed than rejecting and opposing religion. This point might seem obviously true, even banal, but it is not, for secularists often regard themselves as promoting a positive intellectual moral vision of the world, not merely a critique of religion. They claim to have something new to put in its place. Hence, they not only reject faith, they endorse reason and science. They not only reject traditional morality, especially in the area of sex, they affirm the value of free choice. They not only reject ecclesiastical authority, they promote democracy and tolerance, and so on. But look more closely and you'll find that this positive vision is really nothing more than a restatement of the negative one. And I've said already, and as will be blindingly obvious by the end of the book, the mainstream Western religious tradition itself very firmly rests on and embraces reason and science. That tradition also insists that religious conviction and moral virtue must be adopted of one's own free will, not imposed by force. And while it holds that some of the things people choose to do are morally unacceptable, secularists who also propose or profess to believe that there is a difference between right and wrong hold the same thing. The Protestant John Locke and the Catholic Second Vatican Council endorsed religious tolerance and democracy, and on theological grounds at that. While secularists are none too happy with democracy when, say, it results in school boards that mandate the teaching of intelligent design theory alongside evolution. So what, pray tell, is distinctively secularist about reason, science, free choice, toleration, democracy, and the like? Nothing at all, as it happens. The fact is that secularists are for reason and science only to the extent that they don't lead to religious conclusions. They celebrate free choice only insofar as one chooses against traditional or religious-oriented morality, and they are for democracy and toleration only to the extent that these might lead to a less religiously oriented and social and political order. Again, the animus against religion is not merely a feature of the secularist mindset, it is the only feature. In this connection, we might take note of a curious fact about the practice of contemporary academic philosophers with respect to religion, like Dennett and Harris. Most of them are atheists, but unlike Dennett and Harris, most have very little, if anything, to say about religion in their published work. They are aware that some of their fellow philosophers are religious believers, and they regard the more obviously brilliant of these religious colleagues with a grudging and bemused respect. And that's where I'm going to stop this at this particular point, and we'll be back in a minute. So I heard on the radio a little earlier today, on Friday, April the 2nd, that there was a police officer in Washington, D.C. was killed, one of the Capitol Police. That it's kind of hazy in terms of exactly how it was, how the killing was carried out. Some people say that he was run down by an automobile, but there seems to be some doubts about that. So at this particular point, not exactly sure, but it was an individual that was a member of the Nation of Islam and who was apparently depressed, according to his writings on Facebook and whatnot. But either way, it still comes down to Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and all the other leaders in the Democrat Party, the mayor of Portland, the mayor of Seattle, Milwaukee, the mayor of New York City, the governor of both California and New York, because, again, this is another example of radicalization. The left wants to talk about radicalized Muslims and indicating that they're radicalized overseas, or that it is they get radicalized in reaction to something that is done by somebody on the right. But it's not true. The fact of the matter is they're radicalized by the left. They are radicalized by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the other Democrat leaders who promote revolution. I mean, this is what they're all about. The left is all about revolution, worldwide socialist paradise. And they have told everybody, right now they got a campaign going on, the left does, called See Something, Say Something. And it's just a snitch campaign, that's all it is. It's like when the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, there used to be a slogan on the streets in Los Angeles, snitches get stitches, because a lot of the gang members were getting tired of snitches, whoever they cared to define as snitches. I don't know if that means witnesses, victims, and I don't care. I didn't pay any attention to it, and I didn't expect anyone else to either. Well, the mayor apparently paid attention to it, and he came up with his own campaign theme for the lockdown, and he called it Snitches Don't Get Stitches, Snitches Get Riches. Snitches get paid. So, and why? Because the left wants to radicalize everybody. They want everybody to snitch on their supervisors. They want everybody to snitch on their bosses, to snitch on their companies, and if necessary, probably snitch on their families as well. And so it's slowly but surely we're becoming East Germany. In East Germany, when the wall came down and basically the government was dissolved, and the Stasi, which was the secret police, they basically fled their building, and people went in there and went through the files to find their file and find out what information the government had on them. And they, much to their chagrin, found out that all the information that the government had on them was provided by their close friends, family, and relatives. Some cases, spouses were ratting out spouses. Now, it wasn't so much because the spouse was such an ideologue that they just couldn't stand hubby's anti-socialist attitude, and so they just got to go and do the right thing and go to the authorities with it. No, the authorities paid for information, so they did it to earn extra money. So they'd go out, they would get snitch on their spouse, and then come home with extra money. And then I suppose tell their spouse they got it somewhere else or some other way. So, but that's what's happening now in Los Angeles, and that's what's being encouraged in our society. So we have the snitches get riches. Now we have the see something, say something situation where it may very well be, everybody thinks that it's that's cool that they're talking about things that are going to happen far away from you. But what about your sons and daughters when they go to school? There's a lot of funny things going on in school. There's a lot of things being taught in class that nobody anticipated. And as a matter of fact, the schools never told us they were going to be teaching about white privilege and the like. Now, if that's what they're going to do, then isn't it also possible that they're going to be asking the children to inform on their parents, to be telling the teachers what it is that the parents are talking about, what it is that the parents are doing or planning on doing, so that the teachers can report it to the appropriate authorities, maybe even Child Protective Services. If you're telling your children, you're reading to your children out of the Bible, maybe your kid's third grader goes to school, teacher asks him, "What'd you read yesterday?" Or, seems like an innocuous question. Your son says, "We read the Bible." Teacher is alarmed. We don't need any Bible thumpers in this country, so I'm going to report them to Child Protective Services and claim that they're trying to radicalize their child and create some sort of problems. And so, again, they're the ones on the left that are trying to radicalize everybody. They're the ones that are promoting violence in Portland. They're trying to promote violence in Seattle, in Milwaukee. They promote the violence, most of the time not overtly by coming out and saying, "Rah, rah, rah, please be more violent," but by being covertly, by keeping silent, by not taking control, by not having the police stand down. Let's put it that way. And so by having the police stand down and encouraging people, whether it's with money or just encouraging people to encouraging people to be snitches on their bosses, on the companies that they work for, or having the children rat the parents out, so to speak. It is they that are encouraging people to be radicals, even children to be radicals. So here's a guy, and his first thought when he's frustrated and disappointed is what? Being a radical, doing something radical, and doing something violent. Remember, the left is always talking about making a difference, and the left is promoting violence as a way of making that difference. And so here's a gentleman who was frustrated. Apparently, things were going smooth for a while, and all of a sudden he hit some kind of a roadblock. Maybe he got fired, whatever, hit a roadblock. How do you make a difference after that? Well, one of the ways to make a big difference is to get a gun, a knife, or even use your car and start committing violent acts. So again, what happened in Washington, D.C., as well as what happened in Orange County and what happened in Colorado is all on the left. It is all on Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the other so-called leaders in the Democrat Party. Don't forget that. Yet, the idea in question is not itself a scientific one at all, but a philosophical one. And accordingly, the fabled science versus religion war is a myth. Indeed, one might think of it as the founding myth of modern secularism, with Galileo and Newton taking the place of Romulus and Remus. For untold ages, modern secularists have told themselves and everyone else, mankind lay in the darkness of religious bigotry, ignorance, and unreason. Then came science, and ever since the march of progress has been relentless. The founding fathers of all the scientific revolution got the ball rolling. Darwin accelerated it considerably, and now, so the story goes, a complete account of the universe in general and of human nature in particular, in entirely materialistic terms, and in particular without any reference whatsoever to purpose, meaning, and design, is within our grasp. Like most founding myths, this is a mixture of oversimplification and simple falsehood. As historians of the period know, the Middle Ages were simply not, in fact, the benighted area of uniform superstition and barbarism portrayed in secularist polemic and popular culture. And the elimination of purpose and meaning from the modern conception of the material universe was not and is not a result or discovery of modern science, but rather a philosophical interpretation of the results of modern science, which owes more to early modern secularist philosophers like Hobbes and Hume, as well as to non-atheistic but equally anti-medieval philosophers like Descartes, Locke, and Kant, than it does to the great scientists of the last few centuries, even if many of these scientists happen to accept this philosophical interpretation of their results. Finally, a complete account of the universe and of human nature in terms that make no reference whatsoever to purpose, meaning, and design is not within our grasp and never will be, for the simple reason that such an account is in principle impossible, and the hope for it based on nothing more than muddle-headedness mixed with wishful thinking. We can no more eliminate purpose and meaning from nature than we can square the circle. Once again, I know making large claims, but it is the point of the chapters that follow to justify them. Suffice it for now to say that the so-called war between the science and religion is really a war between two rival philosophical worldviews, and not at bottom a scientific or theological dispute at all. Occasionally you'll find a secularist who admits as much. Nagel is one example. Another is biologist Richard Lerwanton, who has written, quote, "Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. It is not that methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but, on the contrary, that we are focused by our a priori adherence to material causes and to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door, period, unquote. Similarly, physicist Paul Davies tells us that, quote, science takes it as its starting point, the assumption that life wasn't made by a god or a supernatural being, unquote, and acknowledges that partially out of fear of opening the door to religious fundamentalists, many investigators feel uneasy about stating in public that the origin of life is a mystery, even though behind closed doors they freely admit that they are baffled. Among prominent contemporary philosophers, Tyler Burge opines that, quote, materialism is not established or even clearly supported by science, and that its hold over his peers and is analogous to that of a political or religious ideology. John Searle tells us that materialism is the religion of our time, that more like traditional religions, it is accepted without question and provides the framework within which other questions can be posed, addressed, and answered, and that materialists are convinced with a quasi-religious faith that their view must be right. And William Lycan admits in what he himself calls, quote, an uncharacteristic exercise in intellectual honesty, unquote, that the arguments for materialism are no better than the arguments against it. That his, quote, own faith in materialism is based on science worship, unquote, and that, quote, we also hold our opponents to higher standards of argumentation than we obey ourselves, unquote. The conflict, then, is not over any actual results or discoveries of science, but rather over the more important philosophical question of what sorts of results or discoveries will be allowed to count as, quote, scientific, unquote, in the first place. In particular, it is a war between, on the one hand, what I have called the classical philosophical vision of Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, and Aquinas, and on the other hand, the naturalistic orthodoxy of contemporary secularism, whose premises derive from modern philosophers like the ones mentioned above. And we shall see the radical difference between these worldviews with respect to what, at first glance, might seem fairly abstruse questions of metaphysics. The relationship between the universal and the particular, form and matter, substance and attributes, the nature of cause and effect, and so forth, in fact have dramatic repercussions for religion, morality, and even politics. It is only when the results of modern science are interpreted in naturalistic metaphysical terms that they can be made to seem incompatible with traditional religious belief. And it is only when modern naturalistic metaphysical assumptions are taken for granted and the classical alternatives neglected that the philosophical arguments for the traditional religious worldview, e.g. for the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, and the natural law conception of morality, can be made to seem problematic. By ignoring the challenge posed by the classical philosophical worldview and distorting its key ideas and arguments on those rare occasions when it is taken account of at all, secularism maintains its illusory status as the rational default position. Prominent naturalists like the new atheists are sure to, quote, win, unquote, the public debate with their traditional religious critics every time, with the general public unaware that the game is being played with metaphysically loaded dice. And that is from the book called The Last Superstition, and it is part of the introduction. A lot of the people on the left talk about or pretend that they care about the homeless, and I say that they don't. If they really want to show caring about the homeless, marry a homeless person. That's my challenge to every person on the left. Every single person on the left, or even, here's an even better challenge. You're really down for the struggle, you're married, get a divorce, marry a homeless person. Look at that. Then you are really making social strides. You are really down for the struggle, and you're making sacrifices. You're really martyring yourself here. Marry a homeless person. Marry a hobo or hoboette. Further, this works because we've been discouraged, brainwashed by the left not to judge. What they mean is, don't judge people's character. Judge people by their personality. There's somebody I know, a Facebook friend and a former coworker and colleague that is getting married. And this person surprised me, and it surprised everybody. It just came out of nowhere. No one had any idea that this person was even dating. I may as well say she went ahead and so she put on this Facebook post of the wedding, the proposal. And so the guy that's involved here, I am familiar with, used to be also another former coworker, but personality-wise, he's a relatively he's a fun guy. Let's put it that way. He's exciting, he's fun, but character-wise, he leaves a lot to be desired. He was involved in with the company he worked for, fraud. He was lucky that they didn't charge him outright, go to the police department, have him arrested and prosecuted for fraud, because that's exactly what he was doing with the company. But I'm not going to go into any details there. Also, he has a tendency to have a temper, and if he wants something done a certain way and you don't want to do it that way, then he's going to get all huffy about it. And he's going to go off on you, make threats and whatnot. He did that with a parking attendant. What is it they say is, if you want to know about somebody, watch how they treat the help. How do they treat waiters and waitresses? And in this particular case, look how he treated the parking attendant. And he ended up resigning behind that. So he came back to work. They allowed him to come back to work after the frauds that he was committing came to light. So he comes back to work and ends up having to resign short time later. Again, great personality, and that's, I'm sure, what this woman is considering when she's marrying him, is his personality and his desire to be with her. And not stopping and thinking about and looking at his character or lack thereof. Because if she stopped and considered his character for one split second, she wouldn't marry him. Anyways. So that being said, that's why I'm saying if marriage is going to be a very casual event, then particularly for the left, then why not the left can make? And I was thinking about if you want to make a statement, or for some reason it came to me the idea. I think it was the idea that came to me was she would be better off marrying a homeless person. Because if all you're going to do is consider the personality of the person that you're going to marry, you may as well marry a hobo. Then what you're doing is you're killing two birds with one stone. You're marrying somebody that you think has a pleasant personality, good for you, plus you're taking somebody off the street that's good for society. Okay? And then I further thought, hey, that's a perfect challenge for the people on the left. If you're a lefty and you are down for the struggle, you want people to get off the street, make the sacrifice. Problem with the left today is that they're not willing to sacrifice. They're not willing to be martyrs to the cause. Nancy Pelosi, as I'm sure, has a huge estate. Big home, $30,000 refrigerator, $200 gallons of ice cream. And how many of them are in there? How many gallons? It's not like, what do you got an army to feed? I think you have 5 or 6 of these gallons in there. Who are you gonna feed with that? An army? You can't be for your family. Most of your kids are adults, or all of your kids at this particular point should be adults unless you've been busy adopting recently. So who are you going to feed with that? Anyways, so Nancy Pelosi's down for the struggle. Make a sacrifice. For the first time in your life, make a sacrifice. Divorce your husband, marry a homeless man. Okay? I don't just say that you have to leave him smelly. Get him off the street, get him cleaned up, run him through the laundry, run him through the car wash, and then bring him home. And make sure that he stays on the straight and narrow. Make sure that he stays off drugs and etc. Now you're killing two birds with one stone. You get somebody with, and again, go find somebody with a pleasant personality. I don't say you have to go out and marry somebody that's going to be nasty towards you, but find somebody with a pleasant personality, but marry the homeless. You want to solve the problem, you on the left. You want to set the example, make a sacrifice, marry the homeless. And that brings me to the end of a conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Be smart, be honest, be beautiful. Always remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win. I'm Ron, and that's The Drill.